So I just attended the Texas Economic Outlook at the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. And they have this presentation each year to kind of give an update about the state of the Texas economy and what it looks like going forward. And it's very instructive because Texas is a large energy producer, and we have some different dynamics than other states in the United States. And it's also instructive because Texas reflects what immigration policy changes can bring, as well as tariffs. So I just want to kind of give a macroeconomic overview of some of the highlights that I found really interesting, delivered by Pia Orrenius, who is a senior economist at the Fed. And I'm just sort of, analyzing and digesting and relaying some information that I learned. So one of the notables to me was that Texas has lower inflation rates than the rest of the United States. The rest of the United States was running at about 2.9%, and Texas CPI was like 1.9%. And again, these are just numbers hot off the press as well. So they're very current, and some of the labor numbers they had just in fact gotten in as we were listening to them. So again, Texas will be more impacted by tariffs because, first of all, we're the largest exporting state in the country. Plus, Mexico is our number one trade partner, and we export a lot of energy to China. And with their slowdown in the last few years, that's sort of kept our exports flat, which I'll show with some charts in a minute. Again, we're more affected by immigration because of the growth of the labor market. And Texas has benefited a lot because of population growth through immigration. And so that will have an impact going forward. Specifically, some of the smaller metro areas have seen pretty high growth rates relative to the larger metro areas. And this is where a lot of immigration goes, and that has supported those areas' growth in the past as well. So that's all going to be changes probably going forward. The other area for Texas is obviously we'll feel potential impacts with respect to energy policy. Now, the Fed did not specifically talk about that because they were really just talking about, their core mandates and information, but we are the largest energy producer in the country. And so the new stance on energy, whereas energy production is, and especially oil and gas, is seen as very important, that's going to, be a positive tailwind for Texas going forward. So, how some of this was characterized is that the expectation for 2025 is for resilient growth. That was sort of their key thematic. Some of the headwinds in the past, the recent past, were interest rate rises, oil and gas prices being low and then lower, and then election uncertainty. And so the growth was a little bit below trend in 2024 than they expected, and that's the same for 2025. But there's also optimism because of the prospects for deregulation and tax cuts. Negatives, headwinds are tariffs, lower oil and gas prices potentially, and spending cuts. Inflation is also kind of a headwind. And there is some expectation that there will be rising prices in 2025, according to some of their business surveys. In terms of the labor market growth, the United States came in at 1.3%. This was just the immediate numbers that they had talked about. And in Texas, it was 1.7%. Texas still has a growth premium because our labor market is running a little bit higher than other labor markets in terms of growth. The tech market, labor growth has been stable. Oil and gas has increased. Of the metro areas, Houston and Fort Worth had the highest growth, actually more so than Dallas. And then small metro areas, in fact, grew more than large metro areas. Beaumont was nearly 5%, Brownsville was 3%, and they were attributing some of this because of SpaceX, but also LNG. And also doubt, Texas has benefited a lot in the last 4 years with migration, international migration, and that has been immigration, and that will be slowing down as we go forward. The other key notable was that they talked a little bit about they looked at the idea of, is nearshoring really happening? Are more firms and investment going to Mexico, leaving Asia or China and coming to Mexico? And they haven't really, those numbers have not really borne out. And so they're not really seeing it in FDI. They're not really seeing the building of new plants. There's just a lot of shuffling between like China trade with Mexico, Mexico trade with Texas, and sort of things going back and forth, which could be a big problem with tariffs because of all the intra-industry production that happens between Texas and Mexico. So this is just looking at some of the sectors. And as you can see here in oil and gas, so the job growth was 5.5%, and in financials, 5.1%. And then the next larger one was construction. Again, they noted that infotech was pretty much flat. So tech jobs did not increase that much, and if at all. And the other thing they wanted to mention too is just that in the professional and business services that there was really a lot of flatness, and that has been a big source of job growth in the past, and those are big salaries, so that has implications too. This is just showing export growth. So the blue line is Texas, and as you can see, they've been a bit flattish over the last few years, kind of up and down. Now, there was a large export growth here as after the pandemic started kind of waning, and that a lot of that has to do with energy. Again, we have more export growth in the rest of the United States, which is this flat line. Exports in the United States are basically flat. This is just discussing the grid. So there has been a lot of new generating capacity put on the grid. A lot of it is solar, as you can see here in the yellow, and then also wind, some wind. Wind is decreasing here in the last couple of years. And then we have a rise in battery storage, and they were crediting that rise in battery storage as something that kind of helped steady the grid a bit, when there was really, really some intense demand on incredibly hot days and things like that. So a lot has actually been added in the last 4 years, a lot of new generating capacity, largely with wind and solar and batteries. So this is just they were talking about what the expectations are for oil prices. So we've been in this sort of $70 range, and the expectation of those that were surveyed is that in a year prices will be about 71, and then in 2 years 74. And just to note too that the break-even price for large producers is 58, and for small producers 68. There's a lot more to this story. I was at a Houston Energy Conference the day before, and I'll have some more color on that at another time. So oil production in Texas has been largely stable, 5.8 million barrels a day. They have the expectation that it'll grow by about 200 to 300,000 barrels a day for next year, with a flat rig count, which attests to the innovation and productivity in the industry. This is also just showing, a little more color that a lot of the new oil production is happening in New Mexico, and this has to do with the Permian. the Permian has three basins actually, but the Midland and the Delaware basins have been the high producing basins in the Permian. And some of that activity has been shifting a bit to the New Mexico side of the Permian, which is the Delaware Basin. So, and they were just talking about how that's actually been good for New Mexico because they need those tax dollars to do things like health and education. So that's kind of where a lot of the growth has been. And then further, this is looking at electrification of the Texas grid, the growth of the grid. So, and what it's comprised of. So if you look here in the United States, grid growth has been virtually flat. It is starting to inch up just a little bit, but Texas has seen, obviously, it's the blue line here, considerably more growth. And it has to do with our economic growth, the hot weather, and electrification in general that has been boosting electricity consumption in Texas. And there's a little bit of a decline here at the end of 2024. And again, they attribute some of this to election uncertainty. So there was a lot of just, pullback on anything new. So that will probably change as well. This is just some of the metro areas that they talked about. Again, Beaumont, 4.9% job growth, Brownsville 3%, El Paso 2.1%, Laredo. So these areas have been these boom towns in southern Texas, and Beaumont, Brownsville, those have been, partly because of the energy trade. So just their summary was that business leaders are optimistic, even as some economists revise their forecasts down a little bit. The expectation is that there will be 2% GDP growth overall in the United States, I believe. And progress on inflation slowed. And so the markets are expecting fewer rate cuts, continued resilient growth, nothing extraordinary, but that just makes sense because, a lot of the high growth period that we have been in over the last 5, 10 or more years is just kind of maturing in a way. Again, the risks are tariffs, slower immigration, and the rollback of federal spending, tailwinds, deregulation, tax cuts, and then Texas has a budget surplus and then a very, pro-business, economy in general and pro-business policies. So I will stop sharing there. And one other final note that Pia Orrenius was asked the question about, why the Texas success story, and they had done some work and did a book about it. In fact, how is it that Texas has had this great growth? And her answer was sort of, I'm paraphrasing, just because Texas has been willing to accommodate growth and has been flexible and has a less regulated market in general. So it's been market forces. And then also that there's been a willingness to build roads, even if it means toll roads. There was the foresight to build reservoirs in the past, water reservoirs, and also just that the market organically brings the market because there is this organic growth. And also just from my work here, just an entrepreneurial mindset. So it definitely attracts a lot of that can-do spirit. And then obviously going forward, energy is a positive story and there will be continued growth going forward in energy. It's not going to decline. And some years back, there was this expectation, with greener policies that, there was going to be this big drop in fossil fuel production, which is absolutely not the case. And that is also what was echoed at a Houston NAPE conference that I just attended on Wednesday. The other winner is finance. There's the expectation that that sector will do well. So thank you.